Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us for this special broadcast in response to Donald Trump's inauguration speech. I am Jill Stein, the former Green Party presidential candidate, and I am delighted to be here with my other partner in today's broadcast.
Thank you, Jill. I'm Kshama Sawant. I am a council member in the city of Seattle, and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, a nationwide organization of activists, and I'm delighted to be here as well with Jill.
We'll each be speaking briefly, and then we'll be taking your questions. So save them up and send them in. And we urge you to like this conversation and to share it. And let's share the power. I'm basically, we've all just heard Donald Trump promise to return power to the people. But you needn't look any farther than his cabinet appointments to see where the power is really going. Not actually to the lobbyists, but actually to the CEOs themselves. Donald Trump, who promised to drain the swamp, has now flooded the swamp to where it is absolutely overflowing. It's now the bankers, the corporate CEOs, the Wall Street executives, and the military who will be running the country. He has basically said that our wealth and jobs have been stolen by foreign countries, but in fact, it is the economic elite and multinational corporations around the world that are stealing all of our wealth, our jobs, our water, our climate, our peace, and our rights to a future. It is working people and everyday people and the middle class all over the world who are paying the price of this massive theft of wealth from below. Very few, and I'll be coming back to that in a moment. I'm coming to you right now from occupied Washington, D.C., the site of the largest inaugural protest against the most unpopular, untrusted president in our history. Despite nearly 6,000 National Guard and over 30,000 police, sirens blaring and steel barriers rising, people are rising up for an America and a world that works for all of us. We're rising up because we do not consent to a world of austerity, endless war, Wall Street domination, unpayable student debt, mass incarceration and surveillance, deportations, human rights violation, and climate catastrophe. This uprising is well underway, and Donald Trump said absolutely nothing to address it, consistent with his track record that speaks for itself. So we are seeing this uprising in marches and demonstrations across the country and in DC on behalf of immigrants and healthcare, women's rights, with nearly 1 million women and everyday people of all genders expected tomorrow in DC, and over 600 sister marches across the country. We're seeing this uprising in pipeline protests and lockdowns from DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota, to the Sabal Trail in Florida, and the Diamond Pipeline in Memphis, and the Trans-Pecos Pipeline in Texas. We're seeing it in student walkouts from high schools and colleges across the country, including the entire University of California system. And we're seeing it in the International Longshoremen's Union that will shut down the ports of Oakland and San Francisco. A big shout out to you, our brothers and sisters, for leading the way. People are standing up for a world that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. And here in DC, I must say, there is such a sense of uprising and of we the people who are standing up and leading the way forward. It's as if there's a very small enclave of the empire here, which is surrounded by we the 99%. The nation certainly is reeling from the results of this very toxic election. It was not only a victory for Republicans, above all, this was a massive failure of both political parties, which essentially were rejected. And remember, most Trump voters were not voting for him, but against Hillary Clinton and what she has come to represent in terms of this democratic neoliberalism, exporting our jobs, handing over the stores, the keys to the castle, really, to Wall Street. 60% of people are calling for a new party. 90% have said that they have lost faith in our political system. Now, as that system hits rock bottom, we're seeing crises converge across our economy, ecology, peace and democracy, crises that demand transformative solutions that will not come from political parties funded by the same old predatory banks, fossil fuel giants, and war profiteers. It will come from we, the people. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. We must be that demand. Trump's rise is clearly the product of economic despair brought to us by the neoliberal policies of both parties. This has given us lousy, part-time, insecure, temporary jobs, wages that are barely above poverty on average, with 40% of workers below the poverty level, a generation of young people locked into unpayable student debt, Black lives on the firing line, immigrants threatened with deportation massively, wars for oil that are blowing back at us at the same time they are bankrupting our budget, costing us a full half of our discretionary budget for wars that are merely producing failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. These two parties have also given us the climate crisis, which is threatening civilization as we know it in our lifetimes. Yet the wealthy few are richer than ever, and the political establishment is making it worse, squandering trillions on wars, Wall Street bailouts, and tax favors for the wealthy. 8 billionaires now have the wealth of a full half of humanity. The top 1% has more than the 99% altogether. So it's absolutely not true that wealth has been stolen from America and given to the people of other nations. Wealth has been stolen from all of us and given to the 1% that Donald Trump so magnificently represents. There is just so much abundant evidence now of how people are struggling while corporate profits have doubled, stock and bond markets have tripled in value, and Donald Trump has in store actually another $6 trillion in tax breaks for the wealthy that will be paid for by continuing austerity. As we know, he intends to dismantle the Affordable Care Act before there is a replacement. This should be an opportunity to push forward with the true health care as a human right that we deserve through an improved Medicare for All system that will not cost us a penny more, but will redirect the profiteering of the health insurance and pharmaceutical companies into true health care. This is also a president, we must recognize, who is entering his presidency mired in a minefield of conflicts of interest, in ethical, legal, and constitutional liabilities and outright violations that will invariably lead to court challenges, congressional investigations, and pressure for impeachment. This is a president who has an extraordinarily difficult road ahead, and he's beginning with an incredibly strong public opinion and the opinion of politicians as well, and world leaders that have found him to be as absolutely destructive and unpredictable and unhealthy, I must say, psychologically unhealthy as he has already shown himself to be. So it's very important to remember that we the people do in fact have the power. As Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it. We do have it. We are going to use it. We have all the solutions we need for an immediate jobs program, an emergency jobs program to solve the emergency of the climate crisis, to create health care and education as human rights, to bail out the students like we did for Wall Street, and to create a foreign policy based on international law and human rights, and to assure the human rights of immigrants, of Muslims, of Latinos, of the LGBTQ community, of the African American community. Together, we are absolutely unstoppable. The clock is ticking. This is time for us to stand up. We can, in fact, turn this breaking point into a tipping point to take back the peaceful, just, green, democratic future that we deserve. We have the power to create an America and a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. And we look forward to continuing to work with you in the months and years ahead to realize that power. It's all about organizing and mobilizing. Thank you so very much. Over to you, Kshama.
Thank you so much, Jill, for those very important and timely comments. Sisters and brothers, Donald Trump is now predator in chief and the head of one of the most dangerous and right wing administrations in US history. In his inauguration speech a few minutes ago, Trump said that his government will follow the righteous path, that it will be a government for the people, that it will represent the desires of the people, that it will that he will create jobs, that he will create good schools, that the forgotten men and women will be forgotten no more, and that he is going to bring back the wealth to the working people of America. But sisters and brothers, Trump is a liar and a con man. He has built his administration on the worst muck of the billionaire class, right wing bigotry, and the corporate elite. There is absolutely no mandate for Trump's hateful, anti worker, misogynist agenda. Trump will arrive at the White House with the lowest approval ratings of any incoming president, hovering around 40%. But opinion polls will not be sufficient to stop him. Trump and the billionaire class only understand one thing: power. Our overriding task is to build the power of the 99%, working people, and all those marginalized by the capitalist elite. As a socialist, I completely reject the compromising of elite liberalism, which Hillary Clinton perfectly expressed when she said after the election that Trump deserves our support and that we should give him a chance. Nor can we afford to wait until the 2018 and 2020 elections to vote the Republicans out. Trump can be defeated if we build massive resistance now. History is full of examples of right wing governments forced to partially or completely retreat in the face of mass movements. Today and this weekend, protests, marches, and student walkouts are taking place all across the country and around the world. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions, are protesting to send a powerful message that we are ready to fight against Trump and the billionaire class. My organization, Socialist Alternative, has been at the forefront of protests against Trump since the beginning. We called for protests in major cities around the country the day after elections and mobilized over 50,000 people onto the streets. For this inauguration weekend, Socialist Alternative is helping to organize student walkouts and protests in dozens of cities as a launch pad for our resistance. To defeat Trump will require a massive and ongoing movement that bases itself on maximum unity in action and the social power of the working class. But what does this mean? To answer Trump's vicious attacks will require building up a determined fighting movement, one that seeks to mobilize millions from below into collective struggle, building grassroots democratic structures, our own independent organizations. Timid, symbolic protest will not be enough. We will need to organize mass, non-violent civil disobedience. Marches of tens of thousands of people can shut down highways and find other ways to shut down business as usual. We need mass, peaceful, direct actions to block efforts to deport our immigrant brothers and sisters. To inspire huge numbers to take action, we need fighting demands that point to an alternative vision of society that puts people and the environment above the profit-driven agenda of big business. Of course, we need to mobilize around defeating the litany of attacks from Trump and the Republicans, from defending the gains that were won by the Affordable Care Act to defending public schools. But this needs to be linked to putting forward audacious demands that can inspire with a promise of a dramatic improvement in people's lives, like those popularized by Bernie Sanders. Medicare for all, $15 per hour minimum wage for all workers, free higher education, taxing the rich to fund massive public works programs to create living wage unionized jobs, and rebuilding our infrastructure, developing green energy and mass transit. Black lives matter. We need to end police brutality and the racist mass incarceration state. Bernie's bold program inspired enthusiasm from millions, especially young people, while Hillary's timid, corporate friendly proposals of tinkering around the edges failed to mobilize them. This weekend needs to be our starting point. And as an immediate next step, let's make March 8th, International Women's Day, a day of defiance against Trump and the disgusting misogyny and sexism he represents. A day of mass action, protest to defend Planned Parenthood and against all forms of sexual violence. May 1st is International Workers' Day and of immigrant protests. Our target should be to bring millions onto the streets in a truly massive wave of demonstrations for immigrant rights and against racism. We can look to 2006 as our example, when a huge immigrant workers' strike stopped an anti-immigrant bill in its tracks. In these struggles, we will need the broadest unity in action of all those forces prepared to seriously struggle against Trump and the billionaire class. Unions, immigrant rights, women's, civil rights, LGBTQ, environmental organizations and activists, Sanders supporters, progressive Democrats, Greens, and socialists. We all need to come together. But there is no avoiding that there are major political differences of strategy and social interests in this movement. In my view, our movement needs to base itself on the needs of the struggle against Trump and the billionaire class, and we cannot let it be subordinated or restricted to the limits of what the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party will allow. Democrats in Congress will be put to the test in terms of their willingness to stand firm against Trump. Let's remember, when Obama first took office in 2009, he had massive popular support. The Democrats had 60 seats in the Senate and a large majority in the House, and yet the Republicans succeeded in relentlessly fighting Obama, blocking much of his agenda. There is no reason that Democrats in Congress could not seriously obstruct much of Trump's agenda. With the Republicans only having a razor-slim majority of 52 seats in the Senate, Trump will not be able to appoint a right-wing zealot, for example, to the Supreme Court if the Democrats stand firm and filibuster him. Will they? Unfortunately, recent experience does not inspire confidence in the Democratic Party, especially the pro-capitalist politicians who dominate the party. We saw this in the cowardly refusal of the vast majority of congressional Democrats to challenge the results of this election based on voter suppression. I commend the stand of those congressional Democrats who refused to attend Trump's swearing-in today, but we need to recognize that the majority of their colleagues refused to do so, instead shamefully attending. But most outrageous was the recent decision by 13 Democrats to join Republicans in siding with Big Pharma against ordinary working people. As a socialist, I do not think the Democratic Party is offering the kind of combative, working class, or movement-based leadership that will be needed to confront a ruthless foe like Trump. Working people and the 99% need to build an alternative to the right-wing Republicans and Wall Street Democrats, our own political voice, a new political party that rejects all corporate donations and instead bases itself on the funding and active support of working people and progressive organizations. A grassroots, democratically run party that fights unreservedly for the interests of the 99% and against big business, that runs anti-corporate candidates all over the US. I recognize that many honest activists are trying to take back the Democratic Party following the lead of Bernie Sanders. Our differences should not stop us from working together to build the largest struggle in the streets against Trump and the billionaire class, while continuing to having an honest and open debate about strategy as we work together within our movement. In these trying times, I am given great hope by the newfound spirit of rebellion amongst young people. Most important is the growing support for socialism, with thousands joining socialist organizations around the country. The reason why is no mystery. Capitalism is a failing system, and Donald Trump is a particularly repulsive expression of the predatory nature of the capitalist system itself. We found out this week that now just 8 people own more wealth than half of the world's population. We also found out that global temperatures for the third year in a row have broken all previous records, that climate disaster continues to rapidly advance. We need a radically different society. We need socialism. Socialism means a society run by and for working people rather than the billionaire class. A society where the major corporations are taken into public ownership so we can democratically plan how to use society's resources to meet human need rather than private profit. An egalitarian society rather than the dog-eat-dog bloody competition of capitalism. A society based on international cooperation rather than the vile nationalism that Trump is promoting. A few days ago, we celebrated Martin Luther King Day. Dr. King, in his final years, was becoming a socialist. In 1966, he said, "You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of slums. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move towards a democratic socialism." Sisters and brothers, another world is possible. I hope you will join us in the fight for a socialist future. Let's get organized.
Thank you so much, Kshama. Thank you for your very inspiring and astute observations. And thank you all for listening. We apologize for the little technical interference, perhaps the NSA making itself felt there. But we persevere and we go on. Please send your questions and comments so we can send them back and lift them up to our listening audience. So we're going to jump into the questions here, and Kshama and I will work to do a lightning round and give very brief answers to your questions so that we can get as many in as possible. And please give us your thoughts. What are you concerned about? What are you going to do? How are you going to resist and stand up in your community? Who are you most concerned about? Who are you feeling is most vulnerable? Tell us what's going on for you and how you are plugging into this resistance. So first, a comment from Jesus Delgado in South Carolina. He says, South Carolina watching, America will be okay when we have people like y'all. And I'll say right back at you, Jesus, we'll be okay when we got everyday people like you that are tuning in, standing up and fighting back. Kayla Jai Carter Boyd. And I'll take this question to give Kshama another minute to catch her breath. Kayla says, can Trump be impeached for lying so blatantly? And my understanding is that he can't be impeached for lying, but he can be impeached for a whole lot of other things, for bribery, there are laws against conflicts of interest, and he is certainly awash in them, and there are laws against taking profits from other governments, so-called benefits, the technical word being emoluments. And he is also awash in these emoluments by doing deals with other corporations, by taking loans from the Bank of China, by getting deeds and grants from governments of other countries where his businesses are building hotels and golf courses. Ethicists on both sides of the aisle agree that he is in flagrant violation, and he is indeed pushing the limits here. And most ethicists would say he's beyond the limits of what the Constitution allows him to do. So stay tuned. There is definitely a case for impeachment here. Next question from Rick Knepper to you, Kshama. Should America be kept first? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, I think if you look at what happens in the status quo is capitalism, and capitalism is not just a national economics and social system in the United States. This is a global system, and as a matter of fact, you can see that even though national boundaries are used as competition between multinationals and between entities in the billionaire class, at the end of the day, those in the top 0.01%, those multi-billionaires who own the same wealth as the bottom half of the world's population, they know that their interests are tied to one another. And we also have to recognize that our interests as working people are tied to one another across national boundaries. And if you think about it, the solution for the woes of American workers in terms of lack of adequately paying jobs, all the pressures that we see coming from austerity by the gutting of social services, these problems, I don't think working people want to be solved on the backs of working people elsewhere. I think humanity, the entirety of humanity, is really a shining example of compassion and fellow feeling. And in reality, capitalism does not represent that kind of fellow feeling. So ultimately, we need a system, an international system that works for all of the 99% across national boundaries. And that means that by definition, we have to have an international orientation. And that is why it is so wonderful. It is really inspiring that it's not just in America that there's going to be historic protests. Young people, working people, trade unions, everywhere across the world are going to be protesting Trump, because that is their way of saying, as working people in whatever country we reside in, we stand with the working people and young people of America who have a vision for a decent society. And if we stand together, we can not only defeat the right wing, we can defeat Wall Street, we can defeat capitalism itself and usher in a different society which serves the needs of all.
Thank you. Aaron Dan Humphreys says, and I'll take this question, how will you or anyone take back control from Big Pharma to establish a non-bought or biased New England Journal of Medicine? How will anyone in power take on Big Pharma to actually have measures in place to protect us and our children? This can't keep taking place. And Aaron speaks to a really critical problem that hits most of us, most Americans now. Just about half of Americans have one chronic disease or another. We're not exactly a well society, being subjected to predatory pollution, a predatory food system, the incredible social stress that people are facing. We are a sick society compared with the rest of the modern Western world. And many people are taking pharmaceuticals and are being raked over the coals to do that. We need to get the pharmaceutical companies out of the business of running our government and establishing our policies, as well as our medical institutions, which are very compromised by their reliance on private money. Even the FDA itself has an approval process for medications which is very, very dependent on pharmaceutical money. So there are big sweeping solutions here. We need to get money out of politics. We also need to put a stop to the revolving door. We need a Medicare for all healthcare system in which we can negotiate prices with pharmaceutical companies, and your pharmaceutical costs would be covered by your health insurance. Think big here. Don't let them intimidate you into thinking that we have to settle for window dressing on a house that's on fire. We need to stand up, fight back. Let's see. Alphonse Ragusa says to you, Sean, the police should not be killing anyone.
I'm sorry, Jill. Could you repeat that question, please? I couldn't hear it.
Okay. Alphonse Ragusa asks this question. Can we all agree that police should not be killing anyone?
I think that's very, very important that Alphonse said that so clearly, because the sentiment that he expressed reflects what the vast majority want, that we want a society where the police are doing their job as public safety, the people who are looking out for public safety. That is what people want. People don't want a police force in any city where they come in as an occupying force. And, for example, the city of Seattle, the Department of Justice has indicted the city of Seattle's police department for excessive use of force and racially biased policing. And the majority of Seattle, as I'm sure in many other metropolitan areas in this country, are against the use of violence by the police. And the question is, how can we make an about turn in this situation? How can we ensure that Black Lives Matter is not merely a slogan that politicians use whenever it suits them, but that our needs for a nonviolent society are truly represented? And I think for that, like for anything else, like for single payer and Medicare for all, like for full funding for public education, similarly, in order to fight racism, in order to fight police violence, we will need to build mass nonviolent resistance that will enable us to fight around concrete demands like the ability for cities to have civilian, democratically elected oversight bodies that they can hold, that power that they can use to hold the police accountable, and have full powers over the police department so that there is no unaccounted for incident of violence. And this can be done, but it will require people of all races, working people, young people, students on university campuses coming together and forming movements around these concrete demands that we can fight for and win.
Thank you. Sudarshan Suresh says, what can common people do to resist the repeal of Obamacare without a better replacement, better access, coverage, and more people getting covered? So great question. It's really important to remember that when we do stand up, we actually do have victories. And there have been many. We stopped the bombing campaign against Syria in 2013, which was like a, resistance is futile. We are moving forward with this bombing. We stood up and we actually occupied the offices of our congressional representatives and said to them, you got to represent us, not the war industry here. We stopped that war. We stopped the Trans-Pacific Pipeline. We stopped the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We stopped the TPP by doing exactly the same thing. So remember, we do have power. And this is another, I think, incredible opportunity for us to join forces because everybody, millions upon millions of people are going to be impacted by this. The costs of healthcare are expected to spiral upward if major provisions of Obamacare are rolled back. This really will be a disastrous situation, particularly for the most vulnerable. So I think it's really important for us to get organized and for us to raise the bar. We deserve healthcare as a human right. Enough of this piecemeal approach to the problem. It doesn't work. We are not going to have an affordable and accessible healthcare system until we move to a single payer form, a Medicare for all system. So I urge you to get involved with us as part of that project. There was a good question I'm looking for here for you, Kshama. Basically saying, here it is it time, given the assault on labor rights, is it time for the labor movement to militantly reject the strictures of labor law and move toward solidarity unionism? From Bennett Stork.
That's a very, very important question. In fact, among the sections of our society and the gains that we have won through movements in the past, one of the most prominent one that's in the crosshairs of the Trump administration is labor unions and the rights that working people have already fought for and won in previous decades. And actually, if you look at the cabinet that Trump has organized around himself, these are all not only multi-billionaires, but they are people who have a long record of deep hostility towards all workers, towards women, towards the vulnerable populations particularly. And so it is absolutely the moment. It is the moment for us when the labor movement, and I speak as a rank and file member of the labor movement, I'm a member of my local teachers union, I think it is absolutely the time for us to fight back and organize militant struggle against, nonviolent militant struggle against this assault that is going to come on us. For example, how are we going to defend public schools? How are we going to defend the rights of teachers unions? How are we going to ensure that right to work, which is really it's a frontal assault on the rights of labor unions. How are we going to defeat all of this? As a matter of fact, it is not only the question of going beyond the labor law, and I agree with the questioner that the status quo of the labor law does also reflect decades-long assault carried out by the capitalist class and the politicians that represent them. But the labor movement needs to go. I mean, it needs to have a fundamental overhaul of its thinking. I mean, so far, most of the labor movement has used a strategy of not actually pushing our demands forward and settling for Democrats who are not vile like the Republicans, but at the same time do not ensure our rights and expanding our rights. So I will look to examples like the $15 an hour struggle right here in Seattle when we built the 15 Now campaign, and along with low-wage workers themselves, almost all of them not unionized, the labor movement itself, socialists and activists, we built a grassroots campaign that fought against big business, fought against the corporate Democrats that support the rights of, support the positions of big business. And we won $15 an hour in a historically short period of time because we organized from below. And I think that kind of defiant resistance approach needs to be used by the labor movement, because let's remember, already right now, the labor movement reflects the assault that has been carried out on it from decades past. We're facing even more vicious attacks. The only way we can resist this will be not only to stand up against the coming threats, but to build a struggle beyond that. So one of the responsibilities of the labor movement is to organize beyond our own ranks and organize with workers, all workers. I mean, one of the most militant sections of our workers is millennial workers, most of whom are not in unions. So it's really important, I think, that the labor movement not only organize around it, against direct assaults on unionized workers, but also organize around social issues on racism, sexism, on the rights of immigrants, so that we can bring the labor movement and all sections of the working class together and build an enormous fight back and deliver a resounding rejection of the divide and rule that they will certainly use.
Thank you so much, Kshama. That really summarizes the nature of the movement that we are lifting up and that we are looking to help lead the way forward, and that we all must be a part of. I'm going to just take one very last quick question here from Kat, and before I do, I want to encourage people to join us tomorrow at this same site here at our Facebook live stream for the Green News Network. We'll be having activists, leaders, spokespeople from all sorts of movements all across the country, from Black Lives Matter to the deportation resistance to the fight to end student debt, across the board, for election reform, for immigrant rights and women's rights. Ajamu Baraka will be with us as well to co-host this tomorrow. So please join us tomorrow on this station for Inaugurate the Resistance, to plug in and be inspired and to share what it is that you are working on. Last question here from Kat McHugh. Will you be joining with other leaders today in Washington, D.C., including Stephen Grumbine of the Real Progressives? The Green New Deal is possible. Our leaders must be on the same page so we can all fight this together. Yes, absolutely, we must be on the same page. And I think the more we can build this coalition on the ground, this mobilization and this organizing, that's where we begin to take our future back. We are the 99%. We do have the power. There are strong forces arrayed against us, but they are really illegitimate forces. It's time for us to stand up and take our future back into our own hands, because if we do not do that, we do not have a future. The protests and the marches are going by. They are streaming by. They are looking beautiful and glorious. And we, the people, are standing up. And Donald Trump doesn't know what he's in for. The embattled president is beginning, but the resistance grows stronger by the hour. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much to Kshama Sawant for sharing your passion and your vision with us, and to all of you. We look forward to continuing this building this movement. Thank you so very much. Take care.